Okay, so I think we can get started. If some people is going to join us after, um, I think they should be able to catch up. If at some point you're not able to see me or the presentation stops, just let me know using the chat. So let's get started. Okay, so a little bit about me and what I'm doing here. So, well, I am Spanish originally. I've been living in France, in Belgium, and more recently in the UK for the last 6 years almost. So I can say that I have like some international European experience, life experience, but also a professional experience as I've been working across many different countries, not only in Europe but also North America, US, Canada, some South America, some APAC. But I will say that Europe has been like main to go when hiring, sourcing for talent. No, and I've been working in different setups, RPO, agency, working with in-house talent teams. And 3 years ago, almost, I decided to start working self-employed, like partnering with some specific companies in order to provide them services that can be like from advising, training, or delivery. And this has been like mainly with companies for tech teams, FMCG, retail, and other industries. No, and in addition to some startups and agencies. No, I think this gave me a lot of exposure to different industries and different type of assignments, like even when I was like building like the strategy for searches across Europe for XX search in an agency, or when building a sourcing project with a scope of many different countries across Europe. No, and that's why I'm very passionate about this topic, and I think is very important. No, and I'm going to try to share with you some of my history and like some of the insights that I have, both from my personal experience as an expat moving around countries, and also as a professional TA and recruiter sourcer working crafting the strategy and delivering around this. No, and also in terms of like how I see this a scenario, like in many cases I had this issue that one of my clients, a company that I was advising or I was working with, had this business scenario. They wanted to launch operations in a new country. They maybe wanted to open a new office in a different location where they didn't have any presence before, and it was like almost like very open. No, and I think like both with persons like in talent teams, with people from inside Europe and outside Europe, many times we have this vision, no, of like what is how Europe, the talent market looks like, and it will be something like this, no, almost like a huge block, which is almost like integrated in many cases. And when thinking about like the recruitment strategy that we're trying to put in place, this is like a very common mistake, no, that we can assume that what is working in France, for example, is going to be working also in Germany. You know, that the approach that we have with the passive talent in Italy is going to be the same that we are going to have in Portugal. No, and I think that's interesting that happens both with persons outside Europe, but also for those that we are living in Europe. No, and I think like it's something that very important to take into consideration, because going to the business case that I described before in the beginning, like one thing and one question that we get asked very often is like, for this particular profile, even if we are going to be hiring remotely, no, and but which location is going to be the best across Europe, and how we can find these differences, no, and how we can approach it in a way that is going to be impactful and properly understanding, no, the talent market of each of the countries that we are approaching. Um, I think like Europe, if we go back to this picture and you compare with this, of course, it's not only like the political borders that we see here in difference. I think that what we have to take in mind is get away of that image of the vast region, geographical region that is Europe as a whole, and more to consider like all the small differences that we have. We're speaking about like more than 44 countries, more than 28 languages, only like in the European Union. So it's a huge focus of diversity in terms of like how we can approach. There are many differences in terms of like the languages that are people are speaking. The job markets, like unemployment, can be very different in Spain, for example, compared to Finland, and this is going to have a very important impact in the approach that we're going to use with the passive talent also. And also like things like employment laws, like notice period can be very different in France. For example, like 3 months for some candidates, while in the UK can be like just 2 weeks. And these are things that we need to take into consideration when we are thinking about our recruitment strategy to hire across Europe, no? And which location is going to be the best to find the time that we need for that hiring campaign. In terms of like how to build around this, I always like to do like research in talent, like both if it's for just like a sourcing project or if it's like a full cycle project where I need to understand like which channels could be used both for active and passive talent. I think is very important to understand like the differences in times of like which are like the local job sites that the candidates can be using, or any additional resource that we can integrate into the recruitment strategy. So not only this, but also like a few differences as we can see. Again, I think like if one takeaway must be taken from this session is that we need to change our vision of Europe as a whole, as a huge geographical region that is uniform, and more see it as a very diverse region, no? And in order to start the research, I think for me is super important to understand like what are like the target competitors, and to start like understanding like which companies are in each of the locations that we are we're wanting to pinpoint, no? As I mentioned, like for example, we might have like a project for Python software engineers, and if we're searching like companies that are employing this talent, we can see that maybe Dublin in Ireland is one of the locations where we're going to find like big tech companies, but maybe in London we are going to find like a mix of startups and big corporates, which is going to be more aligned, for example, with the type of profile that we're looking for, because we're looking for persons that are interested in the values that a startup can offer, compensation reasons, anything like that. Other things that there are like many different platforms that you can use for this type of research. I think like from my side, I really like to use like this particularly Craft, where you can see like even a lot of details about like the workforce and like movement for one single company. You can go and see like which offices they have already in addition to their headquarters, and like the movement in terms of like the talent growth, or if like in that particular company they're losing talent. And similar competitors, I think Euler is the same. It's also providing insights about the market. Silex, I've used it like also for companies, for example, that can be from manufacturing, smaller companies that are providing services. And also, I think like if you have access to LinkedIn Talent Insights, is a tool that is providing more and more also information about these topics, no, for even like using like for a particular job title and building on that. I think that from my side there is like not one single tool that is going to be working properly for many of the projects that I started. So when building a strategy, I like to combine different tools. I like to go through Craft, Euler, LinkedIn search, and then gathering all the information about like how, like for a for a particular target company and in a country, so I can also present that information and decide what is going to be the strategy. And to give you like one example of a project that I did this year, I was researching like for some startups that needed people that worked creating machine learning products, and I think that this helped me a lot to understand like some locations that I thought could be like more relevant, like for example London, or in could be like also taken. I mean, we could put it on hold and also understand like other locations that like we were not considering at first, like Poland or Czech Republic, for example. No, so this can have I think is a very important first step. Of course, as we're seeing, like there are like many differences in employment laws and like the type of like available talent, the type of companies that are working in each of these locations, but there is also a huge difference across the cost of living for in similar jobs in similar companies across Europe. No, so it's not the same like the salaries that you're going to get into Southern Europe, for example, compared to the northern countries, and particularly for companies that are full remote and are also trying to hire people from any country in Europe, but they have like a particular budget. This is something that is quite important too, because it can make a difference in terms of like the available money that they have for the whole hires, in terms of like the planning and the budget and all this forecasting. No, so I think this is quite important, and even like also for projects where I was like relocating talent from different countries to work, for example, in Germany. I think it was very important from a candidate experience point of view. So not only like to when building the initial strategy and researching about like which countries I should target in Europe, but also enable to provide insights when discussing to candidates, no, and to make it as part of like the EVP, like trying to say, okay, so managing expectations around like what is going to be the difference in the rent, because like when sometimes you're approaching passive talent, maybe they are on a salary, they are used to pay like some expenses up to some level, but then you're asking them to consider relocating to a completely different country where they don't have like these insights about what is like the cost of living there. And I think like from my experience, what works better is to make that easier for the people that you're trying to engage and entice to make this move, and presenting this data about like the differences. No, some tools that I've used to do this. So you have here an example of Expatistan. I really like using like also Teleport and Numbeo. Why? Well, Teleport, particularly for tech and startups, has a lot of information on top of like the quality of living, and link it like more to the startup scene that you can find, like comparing, for example, Berlin to Lisbon, and you can see other indicators. And Numbeo is very granular, goes like up to like the cost of a coffee and things like that are going to make maybe easier for somebody that didn't have this information. No, so I think it goes both ways. Again, having like the candidate, I try to use always a very candidate-centric approach when thinking about the strategy that I'm building. So this is always giving me insights about which countries are going to be interesting to approach, but also what I can present to the candidate. When I'm trying to entice this person to consider a job. Also, I there's like something very interesting that we need to take into consideration, and this is linked to what I was saying before about like the differences in the employment laws across Europe. You can get like very long notice periods in countries like Germany, Belgium, France, and it's going to change a lot. For example, in maybe like in the UK and Ireland, no, it's going to be like very, very different. So this is going to have an impact also in the amount of time that is going to be required to make a hire. And not only this, like what I was mentioning before about like the unemployment rate and the amount of time that you might need to use to convert passive talent instead of like relying mainly in active candidates that are applying to jobs, is going to be very impacted by these differences per country. Here in this graph, you can see like in this table, like countries that are also outside Europe, but you get an idea. So if you compare like almost 40 days in France, 37 in Switzerland, compared to, for example, 31 in Spain, and 19 in Romania. No? So there are huge differences also. I know this is something to take into consideration when you need volume hiring, for example, and you need to run a hiring campaign that needs to go very fast in terms of the hiring. I've seen it, for example, in the manufacturing industry, in sites in Eastern Europe, for example. But it's something definitely that we don't have to lose perspective, because it can have a huge impact in the whole process. No. Okay, so what else? This is one of my favorite ones, because as going back to the initial hypothesis, of the presentation of like thinking of Europe as a very diverse region. Like again, it's a vast, huge regional geographical area, but with a lot of differences. Again, not only language and cost of living, not only the laws and the different countries, but also cultural differences. No, so going through this research of the Global Talent Acquisition Monitor, you can see a few interesting things. No, this might be linked also like to the soft skills that you're trying to recruit for one particular job. No, and the integration, like for example, working with different teams across your company. You might have like already, for example, an office in Spain that is going to be, and you're considering maybe hiring people in the Netherlands that are going to be working with them. No. So all these cultural differences are very important to take into consideration to see if like the collaboration is going to be working. No, but of course this is like very generic in the terms of like this. Any individual might be different, but I think like we can take into consideration that in some Southern European countries like Italy, Portugal, Spain. Generally speaking, like team members, they are more driven more by like the loyalty of their colleagues, like working in a collaborative environment, and instead of like just being not focusing so much like maybe in the individual goals. No, again, this might change for individuals, but it's good to have a good overview if we're, for example, deciding like, okay, we want to put like a new sales team that is going to cover all the European countries. Is this something that we want to put like only in Spain, or are we going to create like regional teams based on these differences? And I think this is also very, very important. No, I think like other thing that is very common, like is like when considering like communication and like everything that is related to how people from different countries in Europe are going to be able to present information. No, I think like, for example, Dutch people are very direct, which is not something that everybody is going to be used to. And I think these cultural differences, for this reason, have to be like also a big part of when building the strategy. No. Okay, so moving forward, we have like, for example, decided like which locations are of interest based on cost of living, competitors, and cultural differences, for example. But then we need to go outside. We need to decide which channels are going to be useful for us to post the jobs that we have and source for talent. No, again, LinkedIn I think is an amazing tool, but there is maybe a lot of dependency sometimes in starting and finishing or hiring approach and recruitment in this tool. And I think this is something that needs to be well changed in a way that we are combining different sources and integrating that into our recruitment strategy. And for more, I mean, to prove this also, like you can see here, like the adoption and the penetration rate of LinkedIn across different countries in Europe, it changes a lot from the 40% in the Netherlands to the 6% in Poland. If we compare like that to the figures in the US and Australia, we can see that that there are other channels that, of course, we're forgetting and we need to leverage. No, how to do this? Well, speaking about only like external channels, there are like many other things that we can do, building referrals with the local teams and building talent communities for one specific country. But there are also like other regional resources, alternatives to LinkedIn that we need to consider. There's a few here like InfoJobs, APEC, Viadeo, Xing. Some of them you can even X-ray search them. I something that I did in, and I think is, even if you don't have like an account, you can leverage and find information from there. And even like for job boards, if you want to be like more granular for some specific industries in some countries, there is a great tool that I've used that is jobboardfinder.com, and it will give you also more information about this. So LinkedIn is great again, but don't rely only on LinkedIn to build your strategy. That's maybe like other of the takeaway that I want to give you today. Okay, and we are running out of time. So for these last 2 minutes, I think this is another topic that I'm very passionate about, and it's everything related to not only sourcing, but also diversity sourcing. So we have seen that there is a huge diversity across Europe, and there are, for many reasons, like but also in terms of like how this applies to identifying, for example, diverse gender talent across Europe. And because of these differences that we have in all the countries and all the languages that are used across Europe, is something that we can forget. And when we are searching, for example, on LinkedIn for talent, and we want to discover diverse talent across different countries in Europe, one way is using like baby names for one gender and like putting them into the first name search filter as a or Boolean. And this is something that we need to do if we're looking across Europe, combining, because there are many different possibilities, no? As you can imagine, linked to the different types of names and languages used, and across like also people moving from one country to another, no? So sometimes when I'm searching in Spain, or I'm searching in the UK, I have my list of Spanish baby girl name list, but I also put like the French name list, because you can have like some French expats, as I think this is also something very important in Europe also, that we have a lot of mobility between, particularly in the European Union, no? So okay, so conscious of the time, I hope that this was very relevant and interesting for you. If you have any questions, we have 5 minutes to discuss. You have like my details here. You can find me on LinkedIn, about me, Twitter, Iker GR. This is like my Twitter username. And please, let's connect and stay in touch. Thank you. Amazing. So any questions? We have a few minutes. I try to rush at the end so we can have a few minutes. If you have anything, please let me know. Okay, so as we have a few minutes and we don't have questions, I'm going to show you a few things. Let's see if I can get out of the screen, and because I make a reference about like the sources and how this can change. So as you know, well, sourcing is one of my passions and something that I really enjoy doing. Speaking about like the different channels that we can use to both for active and passive talent. I mentioned a few of them. I have here 3 Google searches that you can use X-raying some of the sites. I hope you can see it. Like this is, for example, for Viadeo, which is has again changed like the name of the domain name. As you can see, you don't need like an account inside Viadeo to search for the profiles that you have available. What I did here is like use targeting this specific site, and then using one of the target companies that I wanted to map, and you can get access and see this. Why this? Well, this gives you like the possibility of searching without having to be registered, which is in some cases very useful. The same is for Xing. You can use this X-ray search. If you see it here, again, sometimes they change, so it's impossible. Yeah, of course, I'm going to share all of this with you and play around with them, because like the keywords and terms might change. So for Viadeo, that's the one that I came with recently. Xing, this is the one. It changed again, I think, in last month. And even for InfoJobs, that it has like a that is used in Spain, and I think you will see that it has like a public profile area that you can also use. Again, this is like to open a bit more the possibilities outside using only LinkedIn for the approach that you have. Any questions, please let me know. You should have like my contact details. So happy to stay in touch. Thank you very much.